person that is a high performer that is cancerous to the rest of the team, send them somewhere else, because you will end up making exceptions and exception, and pretty soon everybody else that sits around them is miserable. You're miserable because they take too much work to manage.
Welcome to Revenue Insights. We're joined by revenue leaders from some of the highest growth companies. Together, we explore how they built their revenue teams, the journeys they've been on, and the lessons they've learned along the way. Revenue Insights is brought to you by Ebsta. We're an AI-first revenue intelligence platform designed to help you close more deals, retain more customers, and forecast better. Enjoy the podcast.
Hello, everybody. On today's episode of the Revenue Insights podcast, I'm thrilled to have Matt Hemingway, the Vice President of Sales and Operation at Axcient, joining us. Matt has built a remarkable career leading sales teams to success and has a track record of turning underperforming teams into revenue-generating powerhouses. Drawing on his background as an Olympic athlete and an extensive experience in sales leadership, Matt brings a unique disciplined approach to coaching and developing top sales talent. Today, we're going to be exploring how Matt builds, leads, and optimizes sales teams, how he evaluates key metrics, and the secrets to hire the right people for success. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So, Matt, you've had such an interesting career in sales leadership and operations. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey? Particularly interested in understanding how you transitioned from being an Olympic athlete to the business world.
Yeah, I would say it's, if I ever write the book, it'll be my deliberate decision to be an accidental Olympian, because I actually quit the sport after college. I was an alternate on the 96 team, but my first job out of school was actually managing a sales team. I'd never done sales. I'd never been a manager, and I knew nothing about telecommunications. So somebody lost a bet when that happened. So, but within a year, I turned that team around from, we were over 100 teams to a top 25 team. And really just some basic, focused on sort of some basic metrics. These are the core products we want to sell, and then driving some accountability on a daily basis with the team. From there, I moved into I did wireless data in the early 2000s. I thought that the internet would be big on cell phones. I was a little early and the bubble popped, and so went and did some other things. But about that time, I decided to start doing the high jump again. It's fun. So I had a full-time job, a professional job while I trained for the Olympic Games. In 2000, I had the highest jump in the world, yet failed to make our Olympic team. So I still had to put, food on the table. But then just did some sales jobs. Then I was always sort of curious about data and systems, and how do we make systems and processes help people better and do some things. Oddly enough, worked in a NOC for a little while, which was a completely different world than sales. But then after, 2004 was when I went to the Olympic Games and won a silver medal. But I was working in that NOC and doing sort of professional work. But after that, I moved to a company called Home Advisor. It's now called Home Advisor, and where they sell sort of leads for contractors. And from there, really dug in and started building lots of teams. We were growing incredibly fast, built one team up to 6 sales teams, parted a couple off, then turned around an office in our Kansas City area. So did that, and then moved on to do international telecommunications company. And so my career sort of was really varied, and then a couple other gigs in sales leadership and sales operations. But about 8 years ago, I said, look, I'm going to move from doing just sales stuff to more of the operations thing. And I think sort of my core curiosity was, I was the sales guy that could speak geek. So I wasn't just the hey, how do we talk to people and make stuff happen? I wanted to know the systems. And some of that started at Home Advisor, building out, Excel dashboards about pipeline and looking at the cohorts and how things were sort of matriculating through the process and what was working and what wasn't. And so I think it's a both and, trying to leverage, how do I get the right people? How do I get them trained? And then really saying, well, what is the data telling me? What is our sales cycle? Why are we holding on to deals that really are going nowhere? And so my career that's been the career arc. And then at Axcient, and we were recently acquired by ConnectWise, I started in sort of an operations role and just kept building and getting asked, hey, can you fix this? Can you take this on? And leveraging sort of my sales experience and skills with some of the discipline of sport and building good systems and processes and drilling and coaching to get teams going, and have been running the sales org for the most part about 80% of it for the last year and some change.
Wow. I mean, incredible to hear. And you really feel that the disciplines that you learned through the sporting part of your career actually became a big influence on the business side of things.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I was fortunate in college. I was on 7 national championship teams. I've, been, All-American, those sorts of things. And what you see in sport is, everybody comes to the table with a little bit with different talent, but everybody needs coaching. And so I like looking at sort of data as your sort of objective map of like where we are and sort of what we're looking at. But everybody needs a coach. If, all the golf players, everybody in golf has a coach. Every in the NBA has a coach. When you play football, you have a coach, and you have to do that daily. And so I took that approach of what are the best practices we need to do, and let's get a little bit better at maybe one thing every week. And if we do that consistently, then we will get better pretty consistently. And that's really proved it out. I've had a lot of folks that we've had in the last year that moved from, say, BDR, SDR roles that were promoted and were immediately successful because we sort of began with the end in mind of, we don't need them just to set appointments. We need to prepare them for the next step. And it gives them better vision for where they're going.
I think that's fascinating. We every year we produce a benchmark report, and last year we analysed more data than we've ever done before. And what was really fascinating is to see the difference between every sales team has underperformance, and the challenge is, what do you do about that? And the minority of businesses will invest in them, and they'll take it on board as a leadership failure rather than the seller's failure. And they will really try and understand what are the top performers doing at every stage of the sales cycle, and how can we make it easy for the B and C players to follow suit. The less strategic thinkers will literally just take the underperforming third, get rid of them, hire a load more, expecting them all to be superstars, and then are shocked and surprised when, guess what, they also underperform. And they just end up in this loop of effectively just hiring each other's failed sellers. And expecting a different outcome. So I think it's our responsibility as leaders to really invest in our people and make it easy for them to understand what best practice looks like, and coach them as exactly as you say. And while inevitably there's always one or two that just can't be coached, if you hire correctly and you find people that are consistently curious and they want to learn and they want to earn money, they are usually malleable, and it's our job as leaders to give them the tools and the playbooks to help them be successful.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things we talk about, whenever I'm hiring people, I actually say, I expect you to fail. I totally expect you to screw up, and we're going to be okay with that, and we're going to embrace that, because if you don't give people sort of the safety to sort of risk, and you don't make a lot of investment early on, and then you wonder, well, why are they not performing? You're like, well, because you didn't actually make the investment to get them on the right track in the first place. And if you do that, I think what you find is this, your outcomes are really a downstream of the culture that you create. And so if you create the right culture and you hire right, and you get the right people, like you said, curious, driven. I like to hire people that have some grit. I like athletes. I like ex-military, because I know you're trainable, and and if I give you feedback, that like, it's not personal. I'm just trying to help you get better. So
I absolutely buy into that. That makes a lot of sense, and I can see how the history that you had continues. I must ask, do you still have any role in sport? Are you doing any coaching on that front side of your life?
I do, actually. I coached a kid this last year, I guess for the European crowd, who jumped 225 and won the under 20 world championships. He's currently ranked, I think, number 7 in the world right now in university. I also work just privately with one of the better athletes in high school here in the state of Colorado where I live. And then I'm doing a little bit of consulting with one of the better high jumpers out of Canada, a female jumper. I actually worked with her last night. So I'm still involved, but more, I do a camp in the summer, but really trying to help the next generation and sort of learn some things, and hopefully learn from my mistakes, and try to not screw them up. Especially if you get really good talent, the real goal is don't screw them up.
No, I buy into that. No, really fascinating to hear that you're still involved and giving back. I think that's amazing to hear. So getting back to selling, you've built these high-performing sales teams now across several companies. So when you're reviewing all these different sales metrics, what are the specific top indicators that you look for to assess team performance, and how do these metrics influence your coaching strategy?
Right. So, I mean, the starting point is effort. Like sales is a contact sport. Like I can't help you if you're not, I tell people I can't want your success more than you. And the first metric is what does your activity look like? Calls, emails. I mean, that's sort of fundamentals. Another metric I look at pretty regularly is how many unique accounts are you reaching out to? A lot of times sellers, everybody wants to have a conversation, right? And if you know that somebody's going to pick up and have a conversation with you, but you might not be moving the needle forward. You're just hanging on to deals that maybe aren't going anywhere. And so this is maybe one of the mantras that I've talked about a lot. And I take this from sport actually, is when I look at pipeline and so many other things in life, I've reflect on being a high jumper. High jumpers it's a power to weight ratio game. Like how strong are you? How fast are you? And do that. And so my dad used to tell me to look, if it's not motor, it's luggage. And so I take the same framework of looking at your pipeline. Like, is this deal actually motor? Is it getting you closer to your goal? Or is this luggage that you're just hauling around hoping that something happens and that eventually they'll buy because they just don't want you to keep calling? So I'm looking at that sort of like as your deal age is like what's going on there. So that's a core metric that we found. I think deal age is really important. If you know that, for instance, your average sales cycle, like in our world, a lot of it's transactional, is 30 to 45 days to get some of those done. And you got a deal that's, 180 days old. I'm like, you better prove to me why we're still holding on to this. This better be really worth it. And we've got to have some really good next steps. And I think a lot of that is just sort of the discipline of like, of making sure that you've got the right people and that we're really engaged and that we're not just getting, we're not pricing fodder for somebody else. So that's another metric.
I think both those are really, really fascinating, really interesting data points, though. Understanding the level of coverage each rep needs to hit quota can be wildly different across the organization. And top performers are closing 30% of their opportunities off at that discovery stage. They're ruthless at closing things off. And sometimes we see less mature sales leaders really concerned about these kind of the level of coverage that some of the higher performers have, and it's the wrong metric, right? We instead of just having, it's not about volume, it's about conversion rates, and I think really understanding what the level of coverage each rep currently needs to hit quota, and is it trending down, right? Are we getting better? Are they learning every month, every quarter? Is one of the top metrics I monitor every month. And then on the other point that you raised there around time, absolutely knowing that time does kill all deals, but really understanding the influence of that time. So, how many days do we spend in each stage when we win versus when we lose? And you see the stats very, very dramatically. When we win, we have pace through the stages. And when you know that after, if you've been in stage 3 for 22 days or more, then the chances of it closing 1 starts to diminish. Once you know that and you can show the sellers that, suddenly they understand why you're telling them to close these deals off as lost, or giving them 7 more days to make progress. Otherwise, we're going to wipe it off the board. So really great data points. And we did an audit for a customer recently. We've now got we're up to about 380 customers now on the platform, and we did a fascinating review for a customer we just onboarded. They had 122 deals that were over 300 days old. And the win rate, we were able to prove to them, the win rate once they got that old was less than 2%.
Yep. We saw the same thing.
It's insane, right? And the amount of energy that was going into these deals that were never going to close lot of one. And actually, just by being brave about closing things off as lost sooner and showing them why and freeing up their time, it just gives you so much of our opportunity to come do something much more productive.
Yeah. And just sort of circling back to that, and then I've got a short story for you, is that we took, so I also look at win rates. So what's your win rate and what's the conversion rate? I mean, I looked at last year, my team's conversion rate was 30+%, even, and then our win rates, we look even like at the SDR level for deals that the SDRs are sourcing, I expect them to be, their win rates to be between 40 and 45% on a rolling 6-month basis. And so I want to make sure that they're really keen and they're understanding the win, not just I booked a meeting. I want to make sure that they're thinking that they're seeing that this is actually generating revenue and pipeline that's real. You can also look at pipeline if you know sort of what your cohorts look like as far as your average deal cycle. As you look at your forecast, and I started like excluding deals that were older than a certain age because it's not real pipeline. It's a long shot. And to your point, like people want to hold on to deals. When I was at Home Advisor, one of the things we did is I pulled all the data. I pulled all the closed lost deals, and everybody likes the old closed lost deals. And then I took them and shifted them all these closed loss ops and gave them to like the top 20% of the sellers. And we ended up closing at like a 200% rate. So people they just weren't going to buy from that rep. People buy from people. And so like just making sure, I think that's an interesting strategy as leaders, is to look and say, look, maybe we should need to move this. And we see this with account changes, and that works as well. But just understanding, like, if you have a deal that's really old that somebody's hanging on to and you can't get it across the finish line, maybe you've got the wrong person on the call. And it's good to shift it around.
I love that. We did one of the pieces of analysis we do out in the box when we turn a customer on is looking at the cohorts of the different ICP groups they've got. And they may not even know what ICP looks like, or the fact they do have the different cohorts, but it's in the data. So what's really fascinating again is then looking at the conversion rates for different sellers. And you're absolutely right. More often than not, we're finding the wrong leads going to the wrong seller. And there's some really interesting data points around which personas people like engaging with, which ones are giving them the best outcomes, and so on. And once you know that, look, Jane is really good at closing these types of deals, and when she gets engagement from from 5 or more stakeholders, and one of them's a finance persona, and so on, our win rates are up here. Then suddenly you start to realize why you need to funnel those opportunities to that particular resource. And again, it's all in the data. And you're absolutely right. Wildly different results from sellers selling the same product, but just having different areas that they're strong at.
Absolutely. You got to play to your strengths as best you can. Don't, I was a high jumper. I'm 6'7". I will never be a gymnast. So like, just, try to find those areas of strength within your team. And you want to have a pretty diverse team of where their strengths are so that you can sort of solve for those kinds of problems.
So as a leader who's driven by results, how do you ensure that your coaching addresses both kind of the short-term performance goals, but also those long-term kind of skill development areas as well?
So I'll give you an example of sort of how we approached some things with sort of how we did with our BDR team, sort of, because I think that it's played really well. We literally flipped the whole team over because everybody got promoted in the last year. So what we did was said, look, we have a very disciplined qualifying process, which we developed in-house. Me and a little bit of help was it's called SPAC, which situation or story, pain point, authority, consequence, and timeline. And so that is framed in every single deal that basically gets funneled up. You have to have that information in there, or it doesn't qualify to even get a meeting. So that's pretty disciplined. So once we get that moving and that motion going, SDRs, they're going to get tired of the job they're in 8 to 9 months in, right? They need some progress. So we started training and developing them on how to do demos. So when the time came to get promoted, they're sitting on calls with sales engineers and they're learning that stuff. But then we started making them like, okay, this is how you learn a demo. And then now we're going to give them a situation that says, you're going to have to sell against this competitor. And so we're going to have a seller actually that's on the phone play the prospect who currently has an incumbent solution of this other, competitor. And so start working, like having real world conversations that like, you're going to get these objections, you're going to get this. And then like, they totally screw up at first. And like, that's okay. Like, let's find the good stuff. Let's find the bad stuff. We're going to make you listen to your call and see how you did. And so, the old proverb is without vision, the people perish. And so they need to have a vision for where they're going in their career. And if you as a leader are just like, I just need you to grind out X number of calls, and they don't have a vision for their career, they're going to leave you for somebody else. And so, and then you're going to lose all that investment that you've already had. So I really want to make sure that our team is preparing for their next role while they're in the current one, and that they understand what's going on in the marketplace. We can have real conversations about stuff. And, I'm pretty direct. My dad was a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps. So people are like, you'll never wonder where you stand, I'll tell you. But being able to have that sort of candid conversation about, hey, you totally botched that. This is really the point that was important in this call. This is where we're different. And that really helps them in their conversations, just even in the qualifying, because they have a better vision of, hey, I need to know where the hockey puck is going to go, so to speak.
No, I love that, and love the acronym SPAC. I think I've written that down. So it's fascinating to hear what different companies are using. I mentioned to you earlier, we see that teaching a sales team how to use a specific methodology when their qualification is a set of skills that can be taught, and people understand the value of it once they start to do it, and they can see the impact of it. recording that information in the system of record is another set of skills completely. And especially if you've got the volume of sellers and a lot of activity going on, if you don't have a consistent way of this information being recorded, then it's very difficult to start comparing and analyzing the data. And I think that's where AI is just a huge win, because actually AI is great at taking transcripts and taking a consistent approach to extracting the objections raised or the competitors that are mentioned or the qualification methodology. We now got to the point where the sellers can have a kind of a green thumbs up or a red thumbs down at the end of the discovery call. And then what's fascinating is that once they understand the methodology, they only need 1 or 2 red thumbs down before they really change the way they do their discovery. And the impact of getting that discovery right, on the whole sales cycle is so substantial. And sellers skip through it too quickly so often. And again, uniquely, when we analyze the last 1,000 deals a company's gone through, you see so many of the deals that close lost at a late stage. But when we go back to look at the call recording, we find very often that they were never really qualified or never really in a sales process in the first place.
Yeah. So that's, interesting to sort of talk about SPACs. And I think that sort of lays into it. It's like, I grew up in, it's BANT, and, I never liked BANT because BANT is like, you're starting with B for budget. And like, if you start, like, that's just where your mind is going to go. And you're going to get shut down pretty quickly if you start with B. But I think that you're right. Like, sellers are really they're good at emotional intelligence. They're good at reading between the lines. They're not particularly great at necessarily sort of like the data input. So AI, there's this huge opportunity with it to be able to capture information, but you got to know what to do with it. And so I think giving people a framework, which is sort of why we started with situation and story, is I want to understand from my prospect's perspective, like, what's the story? What's going on in their business? Like, let me learn from you and get curious. And then what's the pain point? And if you can't get those first 2 things in, I think you find that the deal is probably not qualified if you don't have some sort of acute pain that they're experiencing or that they know that there's a better path. And so I think that's really, really critical. And then how do I capture that? Because, we've all done it or seen it, the sales call where somebody's sitting on the phone and they're like, and they're typing away, and that like they're trying to do 2 things, and humans are just not good at multitasking. We're just not. We like to say we are, but we're not.
I buy into all that. It makes a lot of sense. And also just understanding the other projects they're on at the moment. You could have a solution that's going to give them a 10x ROI, but if they're working on 7 other projects that are going to give them 100x ROI, if you don't know about that, then you're not able to have a conversation about, right, this is not the right time for this. But as an expert advisor to you on this particular subject, when you get to this line in the sand, that's when you and I should have another conversation. And I think that's the big differentiator we see between those A players and the B and C players. You analyze all the data. Are they getting more engagement? Are they more multi-threaded? Of course, but actually, what does it come down to? They're perceived as an expert advisor, as a subject matter expert to the customer, and therefore, when they reach out to the customer's more than happy to take the call. And the rest of it's kind of detail. But you've got to position yourself well and really come across as, if all you do is kind of after the small talk, all right, sit down, shut up, and now let me show you how all the features work, you're never going to get that level of relationship with the customer.
Yeah, no, I've long said that, if you don't have a problem to solve, you don't have a product to sell. That's one of the sort of the mantras we talk about. So like, figure out what the pain and the problem is. And you're actually better off in the long run walking away and saying, you know what, we probably shouldn't talk right now. Let's talk in a future time, because you earn some credibility and trust. And that's a big deal, is if people don't trust you because you just product puked all over them and you just see them as you have commission breath, and you just see them as your meal ticket to their commission, like, people sense that. People aren't dumb. And so you're far better off just saying, I would be like, hey, Guy, like, I just don't think it's a good fit right now. We got too many projects going. You got too much going on. I'd love to re-engage with you when you get to this point. Why don't I just connect with you on LinkedIn, maybe send you some information. Maybe I'll follow up in 6 months, but you've got plenty on your plate. That's a totally different conversation the second time than trying to just jam something into your pipeline, because you need pipeline.
No, I absolutely buy into that. Makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about alignment now. There's a lot of challenges we see now with organizations trying to get their kind of marketing, sales, and success teams now aligned, all the go-to-market teams. Are you involved in that process, and what challenges have you seen, and how have you overcome them?
I mean, historically, I've been involved. I mean, that was I think one of the greatest things was sort of stepping back from being a VP of sales to sort of running some operation stuff as I worked with the marketing teams and sort of how, at one point, a couple of years, I built the whole like waterfall of like how many leads we need to sort of do that. So I think that's, from an alignment standpoint, it is tricky, especially with this competitive and many offerings and as fast as the market's changing. I do less of that today, but really trying to align, in our world, it's, we try to align really 3 buckets: new business acquisition, growing our accounts, and then sort of our strategic accounts and sort of who are the big players that we can do that. And we need to treat those differently. It's even sometimes a very different skill set, with your strategic accounts. How do we approach those versus they're more high touch, more personal than, the sort of operational machine of, your new business SDR stuff that's coming in. But yeah, I think it's tricky, and every business that I've been in, it's been different, put it that way.
Yeah, I think what we saw from the data, we've just literally launched the 2025 benchmark report, and what was fascinating is in over the last 12 months, from what we're seeing, the businesses were generating more new revenue from their existing logos than they were from new logos. And I've never seen that data point before. We've never seen it that far extreme. And so I think it was 52% of new revenue didn't come from new logos; it came from existing accounts. And so it's such a key component of growth now, having that kind of consistency approach across the customer base. And the data points are fascinating. It really does, even in this AI world, we still know that relationships drive revenue. And I think one of the data points we saw was that when, if the last 2 QBRs before a renewal are done with the C-suite, you're 7 times more likely to get an upsell opportunity. But if the last 2 QBRs before the renewal were with a more junior resource, you're 4 times more likely to churn the accounts. So again, just knowing who the team are engaging with and how multi-threaded they are, not even just in the sales cycle, but also across the whole customer life cycle. It's so influential.
Yeah, and I think, and there's also the other parts of sort of like, like in our business, like last year, I think I grew our new business acquisition like 60% year over year on the revenue side. So we saw way more new business revenue coming in with ours. And a lot of it was, making sure that we removed a lot of the hurdles. In our business, like at Axcient before the acquisition, we would bring people in as a starting point and sort of that land and expand, but then also provided ways for them to sort of self-provision and add licenses without sort of the salesperson getting in the way, and sort of more of that product-led growth. And I think that's what buyers are looking for, is sort of what is that balance. And I think if you have a good relationship initially, because we bring people in and then we sort of build them with their account manager, and we have partner success that helps enable them and make them more successful. What you find is that people I think there's going to be more demand for that. So I don't think that's against the seller. And then how do you align your incentives to make sure that you have sellers that they're okay bringing in maybe the smaller deal, and they still get some upside as those accounts grow. Those are things to look for.
Yeah, we saw a huge shift in 360 sellers. Salespeople being responsible for the account over once they've signed for at least the initial 12 months. That was the model I grew up with, and we kind of moved away from that for a long time. But we saw a massive shift back to this kind of this approach where the salesperson actually nurtures the relationship and continues to, because ultimately it makes sense. Because if you think about it, the salesperson had to build a relationship to a point where they trusted them enough to sign a contract. So keeping that relationship going, and that the biggest opportunity for cross-sell upsell is that initial 6-month period, and allowing the seller to continue to have that relationship and nurture it through. I think you're absolutely. It also, one of the things I hadn't thought about was it takes away the urgency to get the big deal first time round, because actually we can land and expand because I'm going to keep earning from this account. So really another really good point.
That was a big shift for us at Axcient when I first got here. I mean, there was a lot of work that was being done to sort of shift that direction. And that's really where we really started to see our revenue take off, was we wanted to sort of take that off the table so that the sellers would be like, hey, I can bring in a smaller deal and I can still make some money on it. Because the other thing too is what happens, and this is I think what we were sort of competing with was we were sort of shooting ourselves in the foot, because if you sign somebody up for a really big deal, refs get excited, they overcommit them, and then you get somebody who's upset because they're spending a bunch of money, and then you got a bunch of credits that come back, and then finance isn't happy, and you get a clawback commissions. And so like trying to find that right balance is really what you're looking for. Because as you know, if you have a bad experience, you tell 10 people. If you have a great experience, you might tell one or two. And so you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot by sort of overcommitting people and making that wrong decision up front.
Yeah, and talking about introductions and recommendations, one of the really interesting data points, again, it all makes sense, is that the warmer the lead, the higher the win rates, right? So when they come through a partner or an existing customer's recommendation or a community that you're a member of, that they're a member of, and they've asked for their input, the win rates are so much higher, and it's the single biggest impact you can have at top of funnel. But I think less than a third of businesses now even have a proper structured partner program, and it's one of those things that it takes time to get that flywheel moving. But once it is, it's such a great source of new business.
Yeah, and for us, the managed services community is a very, very tight-knit community, and they talk a lot. And you can't underestimate that. If you do something wrong, like it's going to be on Reddit, whatever. And so we really try to address those issues. But sort of that sort of guiding principle of like, do the right thing, no matter what. And you end up in a much better place, and you end up with a lot of fans and not fanatics that are not happy with you. So
the final area I wanted to kind of ask you about was about hiring the right people. Getting the right people on the bus is really critical to building a high-performing sales team. So are there any specific qualities that you look for when hiring your salespeople? Do you use a particular scorecard when you're going through this exercise, especially in that kind of high-growth, fast-paced environment that you're in at the moment?
So I'll tell you kind of the process. So I think I benefited a lot from, my dad taught leadership, and being in the Marine Corps, lieutenant colonel, all that first stuff was, the first step is, hire character, train skill. So that's the starting point I look for and you can only do that by trying to get to know people. Sort of my general matrix for HR is I like collegiate athletes, generally speaking. That they had to balance a lot to get stuff done. They know they can take coaching, those things. Ex-military, I sort of did that because they're trainable and they're pretty driven, mission driven, or somebody who's done something over a long period of time that's seen some level of success where they had to sort of fail and sort of get back up and keep moving. So that's sort of the starting point is what I'm looking for. Then I want to just have a conversation with you. And I want you, we've all heard the saying, you quit your manager before you quit your job. So I want you to get to know me as a person and whoever the hiring manager is. And we're going to just have a conversation. And in like my first interview is, I just want to talk to you. I want you to learn about me and know this is how I operate. I don't mince words. I'm going to be super direct. I'm going to tell you what I think, but I want you to be successful, but I can't want your success more than you. Those sorts of things. And like, I walked them through my career history, sort of like I did at the beginning of this, and just like, you just need to know that this is how I'm wired. And I'm here to win. I'm not here to be mediocre. I'm here to be really good. And if you want to be part of a winning team, then this is it. So we'll go through that. The hiring manager will do the same thing and say, now you tell me your story. So once we get to that, look, if you're going to be a seller and I'm asking you your story and you can't sell me on that, I'm concerned because you probably can't sell anything at that point. But I'm trying to get to know them and sort of how they think about the world, and sort of just their ability to articulate stuff. And what that does is it sort of lowers the guard of people so that for the next interview, we give them, I want to give them very specific things like, I'm going to ask you these 4 questions on the next interview. And if you bomb those, then that means you can't do basic homework. So those are things I'm looking for is like, can you follow instructions and execute? And then we're going to have a lot of conversations related to team and drive and focus and a lot of stuff from Patrick Lencioni's The Ultimate Team Player. I think that's a good one. And I'm looking for, one of the characteristics I'm looking for is I'm looking for perseverance. I'm looking for grit. I'm looking for somebody who's not afraid to work. I worked, I think my first job out of college, because I didn't know, I probably worked 65, 70 hours a week. And then while training for the Olympics, we're 50 hours a week plus train for the Olympics. So you better not be afraid to work, because and tell me I can't do it. I'm like, dude, like I can do it. So I'm looking for that level of drive and people that want to be successful. What I've found is that by being that upfront and sort of demanding about like, this is what you're getting into, if you're going to come work in my organization, the people you really want, they're excited about that. They're totally in. The ones that are going to be like, I want to be mediocre, like they're not really interested. And so if I want to build a team of A players, I want people to know sort of what they're getting into. And we've had really good success. I've got a guy who was a captain of a hockey team. I got somebody who was a president of a state federation when she was in high school. She's a rock star manager. I got a guy who's ex-military, was in the reserves and come in and like, I'm looking for people with that kind of drive who have a vision for where they're going to go in life. The wishy-washy stuff, it doesn't work. And I think that's been my experience, and being really upfront about what those sort of traits that I'm looking for in people and really transparent about it. The right people sign up for that.
No, I love it. And I think that's exactly right. As long as you're honest with people about what's expected, they might give you some bullshit in the interview, but it's very clear as to what expectations are. And then, if they can't maintain it, then they're not the right fit. But how much of cultural fit matters?
Very. Yeah, no, very much. So I'm trying to articulate the culture of what the team culture is like. Again, at the same time, I'm also telling them, I totally expect you to fail. I expect you to take risks. A lot of times I'm hiring people that have no experience because I don't want to break their bad habits from somewhere else. And so, I try to have a long view of that, but culture matters. I was fortunate enough in college. I actually went to the University of Arkansas and had a full scholarship every place else in the United States to go to Arkansas for 60% because they had a winning culture. And I wanted to be part of that. And I think that's what you're trying to look for is people that want to be part of something that's bigger than themselves. They want to be on a place where there's teammates that are focused on winning and that can help each other. And that's really important. If you're not a cultural fit, like that, I don't want you. I don't care how good your performance is and how good your numbers are. A person that is a high performer, I was just talking to somebody about this, a person that is a high performer that is cancerous to the rest of the team, send them somewhere else because you will end up, making exceptions and exception. And pretty soon everybody else that sits around them is miserable. You're miserable because they take too much work to manage, and you can't build a consistent team.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Having one rock star, that's just not sustainable. It's not scalable, right? And what we really need is scalability, and having team players that are working as a unit will always outperform individual rock stars. But especially when they have an ego and are causing challenges. But
well, the other thing too with the culture, just on that note, is the other thing too with the culture is if you get the culture right, what happens is for those that are really talented, because look, there's your A, Bs, and Cs players, those that are really talented and can be the top producers. Having the right culture sort of is a peer pressure of a forcing function of keeping people sort of in check, right? And so like, hey, look, I know that you're the top rep. You don't have to tell me that. I want to learn from you, but also I sit in the same desk next to you. And so everybody here is the same in the sense that like, we're all people. We all have faults and strengths and things like that and treat people consistently.
So once you've hired that sales team member, are there any tips or tricks around how to get them up to speed quickly and align them with the company's goals? What kind of, how much time do you give people to kind of get that first deal over the line?
So I really tried to promote from within, but so having that long view from the SDR, but like, within a couple of months, but we're doing a lot of investment up front. Like I hear, and I've heard through my career, people say, like people are our greatest asset, but like, when you look at like, where is the manager's day going? It's not coaching and developing. It's not spending time one-on-one with them. I expect, like my managers know that at the beginning of the weeks, particularly with new people in, you're going to basically do metrics review on Monday on sort of where were the pipeline calls, all those sorts of things. And then a coaching for skill session later in the week with them. So that happens every single week, that consistency. And so that
even with people that have been part of the team for a long time, you're still in this. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. And so I think, I expect those people to sort of get up to speed. And so it's a constant process. And when you do that, what happens is you end up solving so many downstream problems by making this initial investment upfront really, really, and having a long view. You don't end up with reps making deals that don't make money and that, look good maybe on paper, but you run the math and you're like, we shouldn't do this deal. So, we give them a couple months, 2 or 3 months to get up to speed, but I expect you to be really like, I need you to get the first deal or two in. And we're a very transactional business in the sense that like 30 to 45 days, you should be able to get something done. But I mean, what I've seen is the guys that we've promoted from within, they move from an SDR role. I had a guy retire his quarterly quota in his second month on the floor from being an SDR.
You quotas are too low, obviously.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah, no, but I mean, I think that's the thing is like really like having that long view. And I think that's the challenge is how do we develop people? And if you build that culture right, people will stick around and they'll fight for you. And I mean, I could go to my team and say, hey, I really need this. And I get results.
And it serves the business as well, churning lower performers and then hiring a load more and then churning again. It's so expensive and so long and it doesn't serve the business either. And really, we have a responsibility as leaders to give the sellers the tools they need and the playbooks they need to be successful and not just assume that they'll work it all out on their own.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's as a leader, my dad used to say the cost of leadership is loving people. And so you've got to invest in them. And, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care about them individually and building that connection with them, just like you would expect them to build a connection with a prospect. And so if you demonstrate that regularly, you will find that you can be successful. But that doesn't mean tell them they're wonderful all the time. That means caring enough about them and say, no, like that was wrong. Like we got to figure that out.
No, I appreciate that. So Matt, final question. I really enjoyed today's session, but when you're reflecting on your own journey, is there one particular lesson that you've learned about leading these high performing sales teams that you wish you'd known earlier in your career?
Yeah, I think because I'm pretty operational and driven, I think I made some mistakes early on about not taking the time and maybe minimizing the time I spent just getting to know the people up front. I'm pretty mission driven. And so it's easy to get lost in meetings and spreadsheets and reports and all those and, the CRMs, because I run the CRM too. My team does that too. So I think making sure that you're taking the time to make that connection with your people makes such a big difference. And that, your teams can perform if the people process systems are right. And you build, and it's about culture. Results are downstream of culture. And I think as a sales leader, it's easy to get sort of seduced into looking at the outputs and the reports versus like focusing on how do I get these behaviors right and getting the process right so that people can live in that space where they're comfortable. As a high jumper, it's like you measure your steps. There are specific things that you need to do to be able to execute the thing. It's like, let's get those behaviors right. And if we can work on that and partner with our people and that they really feel like the leadership team is aligned and partnering with them, the results will just happen. And your customers will be happier too, because you're demonstrating that like that just transcends through the organization and through the people. And so like, I knew it, you can know it in your head, but how you execute on it, that's the harder part. And just don't be seduced by whatever it is. And I'll just end with this. I've long said to the team that your success in life has far more to do with what you learn to say no to than what you say yes to. It's because no helps you set a priority. And so like when I was training for the Olympics, my goals were stay married, pay the mortgage, and make an Olympic team. And I think we have too many distractions. And I think as your sellers, and we think about this with tools, is learn to say no to more so that you can stay focused on the things that really matter.
Yeah, no, fascinating and really valid point. That the volume of opportunities we see entering the pipeline that don't match ICP, that are just a waste of everybody's time, is only going up. And part of that's down to the challenge of everyone misquoted in 2024. So we'll spend more money on marketing and will generate more leads. And the top performers are able to kind of look through those and find the one that really matches ICP, and they want to focus their energies on it. But the lower performers, it will just work anything, thinking that being busy is a good thing. And I think our job as leaders is to really help them to say more often, to say no more often, which I think is exactly the right point.
Yeah, absolutely. You say no. You've got to say no. If somebody wants a price that's way too low, no, sorry.
It's not how we operate. Matt, thank you so much for today. If people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
So you can you can hit me up on X, or matthemingway.com. There's a form people can fill out there, or my LinkedIn profile. Would love to connect with whoever's out there. But I'll be publishing some stuff that I'll be writing over the next, specifically around SPAC here in the next coming weeks, I think. But yeah, those are the places to get me.
Fantastic. Well, we'll make sure we add a link to those releases in the podcast as well when they're ready. And if anyone wants to reach out to Matt on LinkedIn, I'm sure if you mention the podcast, I'm sure he'll be happy to receive. Matt, thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely.
So much learns. I've got a whole page of notes here off the back of our conversation. So thank you for your support. The community really appreciates it, and we look forward to watching your career continue to progress.
All right, thanks, guys. It's been really fun.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to Revenue Insights from EBSTA. If you want to learn more from some of the brightest minds on how to predictably and efficiently grow revenue, then subscribe to our newsletter. We'll deliver actionable insights straight to your inbox. Go to ebsta.com/newsletter. See you soon.